My name is Ian Brooks. I was born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky. I am a public health professional, specifically in community and behavioral health and reproductive health as trans masculine folks in the South are concerned. I'm also a birth doula that's been donor trained, and that's a new exciting adventure for me.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I am Derek Guy. I am originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but I've been here for about 6 or 7 years now. I am an HIV prevention specialist, so I work with individuals who are wanting to be tested for HIV and Hep C. We also do Hep C training. I work for University of Kentucky. But I'm stationed here in Louisville. Outside of that, I am a polyamorous pansexual man. I'm a current reigning Kentucky Leather Pride Boy for Kentucky, so that's a cool title that I have, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. So.
Zion, if you wanted to go ahead and did you want to talk some about the work that you're doing currently? You're muted.
We've been at this for how long have we been at this video stuff? And I can't get it together. So I've long since had, I wouldn't say like an interest in reproductive health. I find that many marginalized folks, we don't get to have like an interest. I like this work because it directly affects me. And so as a person who, had experienced discrimination in healthcare, specifically around reproductive health, it had always been a goal of mine to be a direct care provider. And so that looks a lot of different ways. One, doing public health stuff. Also, there's ways that shows up, representation and research, but also I'm in school working towards being a nurse midwife. And yeah, so I, to that end was I think being a doula would be cool. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, because I think we're in a safe place. Pregnancy is something that is it's something that I'm having to work towards. To be comfortable with. And I think that this, being a doula is really providing a place of growth for me, not only for me personally, but for me professionally. And I definitely welcome, that work. I also recognize that there aren't a lot of folks who look like me that are doulas or that are nurse midwives, and my most salient identities are Blackness and fatness. There's also not a lot of trans masculine doulas that specifically are Black. So recognizing that there's this gap in services, and that pretty much anybody, regardless of their race or their gender identity, body size, disability, social determinants of health, whatever they may be, deserves to have access to any tools or resources that can give them a safe, equitable, and healthy birthing experience. So yeah, so to that end, I did my training back in March, and I don't know, sometime in April, launched the Dandy Doula birthing and consulting services. Yeah, I just had my first consultation today. That's pretty exciting. I'm happy to be in this work and definitely learn more about it and figure out how that can work into my eventual standard practice.
guess I'll talk a little bit about the work that I do. I specialize in doing HIV testing for individuals within the community. We also offer Hep C testing. I do a lot of education around PrEP and what PrEP is for, different PrEP providers. We do referrals for individuals who have been diagnosed with HIV and need linkage to care, as well as a lot of education around safe sex, different contraceptions, and just a lot of education. We go out to any place and every place to educate, to give out information, to do testing. That's a big portion of the job. The other part of the job that I really enjoy is syringe exchange, where we are in different locations around Jefferson County, and we're doing a syringe exchange for people who inject drugs, and making sure they have safe and accessible needles and cookers and water and things that they need to make sure that they're safe and they're not getting other diseases, and just making sure everyone in the community is being safe. And they keep syringes off the streets as well because people are turning them into us. So that's a little bit of what I do in my professional life. In my private life, you know, I do a lot of work within the leather community about education around trans individuals, particularly trans masculine individuals. I am the first trans masculine person to hold my title. So it's been a lot of education for a lot of different individuals about what that looks like for leather culture. I just became a full brother of Onyx Great Lakes chapter, and I'm the first trans man within their chapter as well. So it's really about education and kind of opening that first door and having those uncomfortable conversations now so we can pave the way for the future.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for telling us a little bit about what you do. And now I have some questions for y'all, if that's all right. First off, what does sexual wellness mean to you?
Sure. To me, like I think of any type of wellness or health as just being full spectrum. You know, so to me, sexual wellness isn't just about, you know, sex or sexuality. It's, you know, it encompasses mental health, physical health, emotional health. You know, so I think, you know, I think anything that like that a person feels like they can bring their full self to, in a way that's like not compartmentalized is sexual wellness.
Yeah, piggyback off of that, I think very, very similarly. I think that sexual wellness is a holistic approach for me. So it takes care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul. I think that it's really important that people are being safe when they're being sexually active and even emotionally active, being safe there. I'm in school to be a mental health counselor, so I'll be a therapist in like 2 to 3 years roughly. And I think that that's really important when we get into emotional health and emotional well-being as well. I think those are huge components of sexual wellness. But also just the basics, safe sex, making sure if you have access to contraception, if you have access to morning after pill, things like that. I really value having places in the community where we have those access availability.
Sick, yes. So, sorry, sick is my word of the month. It doesn't always, it's a weird one, but anyway, off of that, what are some barriers that you all have seen to sexual wellness, particularly for trans folks?
Yeah, so I guess I should also say like for my paid work, which is not to say that Duo isn't paid work, like my 9 to 5 is I work at the Health Sciences Campus, University of Louisville, Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so we do a lot of work with the School of Medicine, nursing, public health, and dentistry, mostly around how to provide structurally competent care to various populations. And so through that work and through like my research and then also just personal experience, you know, one of the main barriers that I hear is just around providers, whether it's lack of providers or lack of like structurally competent or what some folks would call culturally competent providers, and you know, folks feeling, you know, because there's so many of those providers that like don't really know a lot and just like feeling exhausted and just fatigued from, you know, constantly having to educate their providers, like even though like this is like a paid like a service that they're paying for, like they show up to their appointments, you know, not only like ready to do work but like expecting you know, to have to do that work to get their providers up to speed. There's tons of other barriers, but like I feel like that's like a main one.
Yeah, I definitely think that that is a huge barrier. Another barrier I often hear people speak about is just the lack of having providers that look like them or have experiences that they have experienced. So whether that be trans specific or even as simple as racially specific. A lot of African Americans struggle with not having a doctor or someone in healthcare that looks like them. And that's a huge access barrier for a lot of individuals. So yeah.
Yeah. And kind of a like follow up to that question, do you think that the language that we use to describe sexuality in general puts a limitation on sexual wellness for trans folks? I recognize that's a leading question, but it's okay because we're not doing research here.
Right. No, yeah, but I mean, I think also like the research does, I mean, like for whatever little bit of research that there is, like does show that. And that was something that I started working on when I was an undergrad. That was my, you know, special project, was like creating a curriculum for trans masculine folks. It was around HPV and cervical cancer at the time. So this is like a little bit, maybe like a little bit around the time or like shortly before folks were really like promoting the vaccine. And, you know, so it was something that I had seen in my personal experience and then like stuff that I had seen in the community. And I was like, I wonder like what people know about HIV and, you know, or HPV and cervical cancer, like about the risk factors, like this, because there was no data. So it's like, you know, it's like starting, you know, from point A. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, came up, and this was like, you know, surveying people from pretty much like the South, like Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, like, I don't know, whatever you consider your typical Southern states. And yeah, like a lot of folks were like, yeah, like I don't see myself represented, you know, in materials. And like that would be, you know, really helpful, or like that would, you know, like motivate me to want to like ask more questions or seek out care. And it's really interesting, like in like whether it's HPV or cervical cancer or, you know, pregnancy, like you have these two things that are like, based on our society, like historically pretty gendered things. Like the cervix is a pretty gendered thing. You know, like the reproductive organs that, you know, are involved in, you know, like sustaining and like giving birth to a baby. Those are pretty gendered things. And so it's been really interesting, and like having like these conversations and like coming up with different, you know, or modifying different kinds of educational materials of like, you know, finding different language, finding new language, you know, to discuss these parts that are integral in, you know, sexual health, and still like honoring, you know, people's identity, and, you know, just kind of like where they're at. But it's tricky. It's a it's tricky. If you want a good puzzle, like go to like CDC or the Cancer Society or something, and like pull up their materials and try to queer that up.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything that Zion said. It's interesting. Zion's one of my closest friends, so half the time when he's talking, I'm like, exactly, you get it. You get what I'm thinking right now. But yeah, I definitely think that it's a hard thing to it's a hard thing to separate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's not like it's not impossible. It just it's
Oh, you got muted.
or sorry, yeah, and I hit it. Yeah, so like I was saying, it's not as possible. It's hard, but I think that the more I think it's great that we have like so many resources these days to like train folks in healthcare. I think that's awesome, and it really has come a long way. But I also think now, and I've like felt for a long time, that it's also really important for folks like us to just be in those positions. Like we need more Black doctors, we need more trans doctors, we need more Black trans doctors, we need more queer doctors, like all of those things. Like we need more directly affected folks that are in these positions that are able to provide care. And just because like we have those shared identities, by no means like makes us an expert or that we won't mess up. Um, but I think that having those various lived experiences are kind of priceless when it comes to it's kind of like providing those services. Like I can't tell you how many times like someone has like asked to pick my brain, and then they sat across the table from me and asked what I thought was the most basic question, and I'm just like, how do you like how do you have your job and like they got you working with people? Like it's, but again, like not all sense is common sense, and it also depends on like what your lived experience is, like whether or not that's common, and so that's something that you can't really teach. So like getting folks in those positions as doctors, public health professionals, dentists, nurses, social workers, all of the areas that encompass holistic health is where it's at right now.
I feel like we already got a lot of this. But I wanted to ask what resources need to exist or what cultural shifts need to happen for trans folks to feel empowered with regard to their sexual wellness. So you all already like talked about this a lot, which I think is great. But just are there any other things that like come to mind when you're like, yes, this is something that we need? It's okay if not. Like, I mean, I feel like having like providers with those identities is like a big part of it, and like getting the language right is part of it. And there's also just a lot.
Yeah, no, I definitely think having a provider that has those shared experiences is important. I definitely think that, when we talk about sexual wellness, access is important. I think that making sure people have fair, accessible things. I think that, like, for a long time, PrEP was not accessible for just your average person. You had to have a certain amount of high risk behaviors for people to prescribe PrEP. And then when it got to providers providing PrEP, you only could find like one or two in the whole city. So it was not very accessible, but over time and over training, we were able to get more providers comfortable with prescribing PrEP and getting that out there, getting that word out there, especially to our our college age kids and our young adults who are highly like more sexually active. So that was, I definitely think accessibility is really, really important.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like you said, having the providers, having educators, and then like I mentioned before, like, just materials, whether it's like print materials or websites, things of that nature. Um, and there's like a lot of really like, because again, like, this doula work is new for me. So I've been like, I've joined like the queer doula workers and Black birth workers. And yeah, there's a lot of really like great resources that, people have in their community, with regards to, pregnancy and, being queer, or pregnancy and being trans. Um, so yeah, so I think it's cool to like, see that folks recognize that there's a gap, and then they're like, all right, like there's a gap, so I got, like we need to fill it. And so I think that like, queer folks and Black folks and folks of color and trans folks have been like, we're really self-sufficient out of need. But like if we see that something's missing, it is nice that somebody's got it.
That was literally about to be my next question, is like, what resources have y'all found helpful in exploring like sexual wellness as a trans person? Or if you need to think about that, we can also come back to that question, because I realize it's hard to think of like really specific things in the moment. Just let me know.
I would say KHJN has been the most helpful. I'm biased because like Oliver's a really close friend and I'm on the board of directors, but I think the work that KHJN has done to be gender affirming, to be racially affirming, to be trans affirming has been really, really powerful. And I have seen a lot of great things come out of KHJN. I think, Oliver, you have done some really amazing programming and print material for the trans community that's been really, really helpful for sexual wellness. Like you're like the go-to person for any kind of trans specific issue that I've had in healthcare. So it's been really awesome being able to communicate with you and have that connection.
Well, first off, thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. Yeah, and I'm glad that we've been able to do that. And also, I'm always thrilled to get to talk about healthcare in general with you, because you also have a lot of insights that I don't have. And I love that we get to have that exchange. I think that is very, very cool and sexy of us.
Yeah, like I would definitely agree with Derek. Yeah, like I think also too, like, because like I am a researcher, and so like I think about that a lot. And one of my favorite things to say is like the literature is rooted in white supremacy. Like I say that so much, but the thing that I think is really cool, whether it's like people that I know or like people that like I've like connected with, like via Twitter or other social media, is that there are also like, in addition to like queer and trans providers, like there's a lot of like queer and trans researchers too, which I think is really cool. Especially when you're talking about, HIV and PEP and PrEP, like there's been like tons of research on that. And like, there are not many people like, like principal investigators, they don't look like us. Um, you know, Project managers, they don't look like us. The people on the ground, the people on the floor, they definitely look like us. But so it's like it's been really cool to like see like folks who do share our identities that are like principal investigators or like leading research projects, and writing about ourselves rather than like being the subject that people are writing about.
Wow, that was really beautifully put, honestly. I don't think I've ever heard that put like so concisely. But yes, that is obviously very, very important. So I know I feel personally like being trans has kind of like given me more space to explore my sexuality in a way. particularly just with regards to like rebuking like gendered sexual roles and scripts, and like having to be more open and communicative about sexual preferences and desires. So I just wanted to ask y'all if there were, if you all also had that experience, if there were ways in which being trans has like opened those conversations for you. It's okay if not.
For me, yes, definitely. I think a part of me I think every trans person has to have a certain amount of courage in their trans identity to just be trans. Like, that's courageous. I think that takes a lot of courage out of every single person. And I think that once you've gained that courage, you've gained a higher self-esteem and a higher understanding of your own sexuality. And I think that because I've had that experience, my trans experience and my trans identity, I've been able to kind of own my sexuality and my sexual wellness and my, like, how I experience sex and who I experience sex with. I definitely think that has really been influenced by my identity.
Yeah, I mean, like I will say this, like, yeah, things definitely changed and shifted. You know, I mean, it depends on like how people define, transition in various ways. So I'm speaking about like, when I, like chemically, transition, like things definitely change. And, even to a degree, like socially. I think one of the things that, being trans has afforded me, is kind of like just how I look at masculinity, which is something that I've always like, kind of observed in various ways, like growing up. But, kind of like having, like, I don't know, like I think it's pretty cool that like I got to put forth a lot of thought into like, as a person that identifies as binary, like what kind of like masculine person did I want to be? Like, how did I want to portray masculinity in society, and like how did I want to like portray it in my relationships, or like how that would look different. So it's been really neat, like and then I also like don't really feel like super pressured about like having that masculinity like look a certain way. Like I feel like prior I was maybe like overcompensating masculinity a bit because like, we only have like the roles and the examples that are around us, and they're not good usually. So like over time, just like meeting like different, masculine people and trying and like and my friends and just like trying to like, kind of like take the things that I like about them and like model myself after that. Like I love mani-pedis. And like would I have gotten a mani-pedi before, like prior to transitioning? Probably not, or at least like not with color. But like these days I'm just like, no, I want color because I'm gonna pay the same amount, whether I get color or not. And it's cute. So like just in how that I think has in turn just like, I don't know, just kind of like let me like let go a lot of hangups that I had around sexuality.
Yeah, that's always, I don't know if y'all have heard the same thing that I continually hear, which is that testosterone makes you gayer. But my response is always like, okay, maybe yes, but also maybe it just makes us a little more comfortable with like our presentation and our sexuality, like so that we don't feel like pressured into whatever role we were pressured into before we felt more affirmed in our gender.
I'm not gonna lie, like I agree, yes. And like whereas that's like pretty anecdotal, like I have thought like, oh yeah, like that would be like a really cool research study to do. Definitely have to be qualitative. I'm not really a fan of qualitative, but like, I mean, just out of pure curiosity, like I would like to know. But yeah, I that definitely has crossed my mind, and I am curious as to like what that correlation is.
Yeah, I go with like you're just more comfortable or sex drive is higher. So I'm like you're more open to like other sexual experiences that you might not have been interested in before.
Right.
But yes, please do that research. There's so many
I'll
much
let you know.
to do.
Yeah.
Sick. So Derek, how has it been navigating leather culture as a trans person? I know you like touched on it a little bit, but like I'm like personally curious, and I feel like other people probably are as well.
It has been interesting. I definitely am privileged that I came after Jack Thompson, the current IML, International Mr. Leather, because he paved the way and got a lot of hate that I probably would have taken had he not come first. And I think that we did a really good job of weeding out the individuals who were not ready for the growth and the change that the leather community is going forth to be a part of. Like, the leather community is for everyone. It's for non-binary individuals, it's for trans men, trans women, it's for everyone. And I think that the people that are currently in the leather community and in my current leather family do a really great job of upholding that and making sure that they don't stand for nonsense or anything like that. Like, our title, our producers for our contest just released a statement about the Breonna Taylor verdict and how heartbroken they were and how they could tell that their title holders were struggling. And we didn't have to go to them to tell them to do that. So these two white cisgender individuals came to us and were like, hey, this is what we have. Read this over and tell us if this sounds okay and if you're okay with us putting this out. So that meant the world to me, to know that I was representing a title where the producers were, for buzzwords, woke. But so yeah, I definitely think that it's been an interesting journey. I think that it is a safe community. I would tell my closest trans friends to come out to Pride Bar and to come support us on a leather night, because I think that it's a really safe, amazing space where also heteronormative is thrown out the window. So it becomes a more inviting, loving space for people.
I love that. That is really awesome to hear. And I also had one specific question for you, Zion, is you mentioned structural competency rather than cultural competency. And so I wanted to like see if there would like what the distinction is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like you remember how like folks used to use like tolerance, like the word was tolerance, like, you know, and that at the time was good. And then like now it's kind of like moved to like diversity and or inclusion or cultural competence. So the reason that I like structural competence more is like the same reason that I like, you know, like representation and equity more than like diversity and inclusion. And that basically, I feel like cultural competence works, that addresses behaviors. Instructional competence addresses structures and systems. You know, so like, I feel like, you know, if you're thinking about, you know, how things work sociologically, you've got like your individual, your interpersonal, you know, and then you go out all the way out to, you know, community and policy. And like, yeah, if you do stuff like individually, one-on-one, that's good. You know, like that's good. You know, help the people to get to know you. And there's like, oh, you know, I got this Black friend, I got this trans friend, I got this Black trans friend. That comes from, you know, individual and or interpersonal. But like the broader you move out, the less individual and interpersonal matters, and like the more, you know, structure and policy matters. And so, you know, more about creating policies in these systems that basically make it to where like you don't really have to tokenize somebody or, you know, check a box to say that you did a thing, you know, around diversity, around inclusion, around, you know, cultural competence. And also too, like, I don't know, like I feel like cultural competence is kind of like ally, like people just kind of like label themselves as such, and just like start giving themselves cookies. And it's like, no, you need to change something systemically. Yeah, so that's why I like it better.
Yes. That makes complete sense. Thank you for explaining that. And I love that term. I had not heard that term before, but that is like very, very sick and cool. Okay. And so next question, once again, if you need time, I can come back to it because it's specific, but I was wondering if you all had any recommendations for like social media pages that are affirming for trans people and also discuss sexual wellness for people to like become more educated or feel more empowered. It's okay if not.
I think I could like, so I could say yes, and can I email them to you and like to share with people? Because like, I mean, mainly like I've like come across like a lot of really cool groups, websites, you know, people on Twitter, and like I said, like the whole like queer doula group, like all of those folks, you know, to recommend them and or like the services, and a lot of us are in the South, which is cool. So yeah, so I think like yeah, I'd be happy to put together like a list of like some of the things that I've come across that I like to share with people.
Same. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I can definitely get some to you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And like this, once we get it transcribed, will like go up as a YouTube video and I can like drop those links right here. I don't know how YouTube videos actually work, but I see people do that. So fingers crossed. Yeah. So, okay, we have a lot of time left and I've run through all the questions that I wrote down because you all had perfect and very concise answers. Not that there's a right answer to anything, but so, do you all have any questions that you would like to ask each other? Do you have any like topics that you feel are super central to like sexual wellness for trans people that we haven't talked about?
I think we haven't talked about communication, which I think is really important in sexual wellness, especially because in the LGBTQIA community, there is a lot of polyamorous relationships. And really to navigate open relationships and polyamorous relationships, you need communication, and communication is key. I definitely think that goes for communicating about body things, communicating about emotion things, communicating about mental things. Communication is a really, really important component of sexual wellness that I think we didn't really touch on, but is definitely super important.
Yes. That is super important. And like, I often like, this is like kind of specific, but anytime we talk about like communication and like sex in general, I think about like how differently I react to like some people saying a word to me compared to other people. Like, and I'm like, the key is that maybe you ask first. Like maybe me as a non-binary person, you don't like respond to my Facebook story with daddy. Maybe you ask first. Maybe you say, hey, what words do you like being called? Like what words feel good for you? Or like, is this an appropriate word to call you? But I feel like that is something that maybe isn't like is as important for like cis folks, but maybe doesn't come up as much. is like having to communicate like not only about like the things you like doing, but like also, you know, what you like your body parts to be referred to as, and like what you like to be referred to as, like during sex, outside of sex, like in any scenario.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, it's been like really, really funny. Kind of watching how like hookup apps have changed like over time. Um, yeah, so it's been like, and even like to go back to like Craigslist, right? It's like, so you go from Craigslist to like now these hookup apps. Um, so yeah, like I think yeah, it with like, and I don't like, I no longer I'm in a monogamous relationship, so like, you know, but back when I was like, you know, my cruising days, um, cruising days. That's another thing. Like, I don't know if we talk about this, like, but most like a lot of trans guys, we have our cruising days. Um, and so like, but during that time, uh, yeah, just kind of like this thinking about like the questions like that I would get like back in, I don't know, 2010, you know, like versus like the questions that I would get in like 2013, which that's not really a lot of time, but just definitely watching, you know, how those apps have changed, especially even with like, um, you know, like the things that you can choose, like for your identities. Um, but and I do like think that that's a great first start, but also like based on interactions, like there's still some serious education lacking. So I don't like, and I think like I don't know what that looks like for, you know, like those different apps, and like not only like just around like sexuality, but just like race. You know, like no fats, no femmes, no Asians, no blacks. You know, there's like a lot. There's a lot I think to still be worked on. Um, you know, in that culture, and it's come a significant long way.
It may be performative, but because you're out of the loop, you wouldn't know this. But Grindr did this whole like thing where they were talking about different identities and how like your trans individuals on this app feel, and like press this button so you can learn from this particular interaction. So it was really interesting to be on Grindr and be like, wait, what? What just
Oh,
happened?
Yeah.
I follow them on Instagram. I think that.
Grindr's always doing stuff. They're always doing something. Yeah.
They are. That's how they stayed in business.
Fair, yes. God, if I had a penny for every time I had to read the term manhole in that app,
Manhole.
I would be able to pay for everyone's gender affirming surgery. There would be no need for our fund because I solely could fund it. Okay, well, it is 6:44. I feel like this has been a super productive discussion. Do you all have anything you want to add? Anything that you feel is super important that we haven't talked about yet? And if you think of anything later, fun fact, planning on doing these once a month from here on out so we can come back. We can come back and chat again. But if y'all have anything right now.
Well, I'm definitely going to plug my work. So if you have events coming up, or if you know a good way to get into the community for HIV testing and Hep C testing, please let me know. You can inbox me. If you're on Facebook, I'm Cup Derek. Or if you need to email me, it's knowyourstatusky@gmail.com. So yeah.
Yeah. Also, too, I can't think of anything, and yes, we'll definitely get you the list. Um, yeah, shameless plug as well. Like new doula here. You're gonna have a baby soon. Holla at your boy. You know, slide into my DMs. DandyDoula.com.